Imperialism has been the most powerful force in world history over the last 4 or 5 centuries, carving up whole continents while oppressing indigenous peoples and obliterating entire civilizations. This is the opening to the book Against Empire by Michael Parenti, which is an accurate and thought-provoking assessment of U.S. foreign policy and empire as a whole. Hi, my name is Joey, and this is another review for the Geopolitical Insurgent Library. Before we move on, one should note that this book was written in 1995. This, however, does not mean that the context is not appropriate for the modern day. In the book, Parenti provides a brilliant expose on global U.S. hegemony and the brutal realities which it entails. The beginning of the book covers the basics of imperialism and details how imperial domination is enacted on a country. While noting that imperialism is older than capitalism, Parenti notes how imperialism has evolved over the course of capitalism's development. Emperors and conquistadors were interested mostly in plunder and tribute, gold and glory. Capitalist imperialism differs from these earlier forms in the way it systematically accumulates capital through the organized exploitation of labor and the penetration of overseas markets. Capitalist imperialism involves in other countries, dominating their economies, cultures, and political life, and integrating their productive structures into an international system of capital accumulation. As foreign capital penetrates the markets of global South countries, it destroys the local political and economic structures of the country. The societal structures are adjusted to meet foreign capital extraction needs. Highways are built for travel between the mines and corporate buildings, instead of for people in rural areas who relied on roads to see a doctor or go to school, for example. Cooperative lands are replaced by large agribusiness factory farms. Self-sufficient peoples become disenfranchised wage workers. Luxury housing is built instead of hospitals or housing for the poor. Cash export crops instead of food for local markets. Being underpaid for exports while overcharged for imports. Predatory loans and accumulated interest, and on and on. Parenti especially notes that these exploited countries are not underdeveloped, but rather overexploited. Foreign capital extraction has resulted in a tremendous transfer of wealth from global South countries to the financial elites in the imperial core. While many of these countries may not be directly occupied by military force, international finance capital is in effect the occupier. Parenti describes that while the large direct military operations and occupations are largely a thing of the past, low-intensity imperialism, mostly done with a client regime that receives economic and military support from the United States, has taken U.S. wars and imperialism off the radar. This low-intensity imperialism features a covert role of the U.S. and as such won't be subject to domestic political will, such as in Vietnam or even Iraq for a more recent example. These regimes backed by the U.S. were subservient to the dictates of foreign capital and committed many gruesome crimes to serve it, to include death squads. The U.S. role in backing brutal military regimes is well documented throughout the book. This brings us to what I feel is a quote that best represents the core thesis in Against Empire by Michael Parenti. Imperialism is a system in which financial elites forcibly expropriate the land, labor, resources, and markets of overseas populations. The end effect is the enrichment of the few and the impoverishment of the many. Imperialism involves coercive and frequently violent methods of preventing competing economic orders from arising. Resistant governments are punished, and compliant ones or client states are rewarded with military aid. Attached to no one country, international finance capital is interested in making the world safe for its investments and for the overall system of capital accumulation. You see, the multinational corporation views the world as its market and seeks to be above the authority of any sovereign country. Any country that undertakes an economic order or policies that contradict this dynamic is targeted with coercive measures such as sanctions and violence. The latter in particular is perpetuated by the U.S. national security state, especially the CIA, who has overthrown numerous governments and installed brutal military puppet regimes friendly to the interests of Western multinational corporations. Some examples of the above mentioned in the book include Grenada, Haiti, Nicaragua, and much more. Now, this is the main motivator of why the U.S. has a track record of wars throughout the Cold War, and even now why they have hundreds of military bases across the world. This is the primary motivator of U.S. foreign policy and empire. The entire world's market must be kept accessible to finance capital, and the local structures of countries must be integrated into the international capital accumulation system. Any country that undertakes economic orders based on socialism, communism, collectivism, or cooperatives, or self-sufficiently, or development that simply serves the needs of the people rather than the profits of Western capitalists is viewed as a threat to this very system. The interests of Western capital here are to be supreme over the interests of the world's people. This is what motivates brutal regime change wars and coups and the insertion of reactionary client regimes. Understanding this is key to understanding the nature and motivations of U.S. foreign policy, and this book brings these points home in a straightforward and stimulating way. Furthermore, the book goes on to mention how the expanding empire has effectively turned the U.S. into a third world country, the propaganda used to justify imperialism, the deceptions by the ruling class and state, and much, much more. Arthur closes the book with describing how empire is portrayed in academia, as well as the purging and censorship faced by anti-imperialist voices and Marxists during the Cold War, followed by some real alternatives and ways forward. This book is written in a very stimulating way, and one should note that it was written in 1995. However, the book is still very much relevant in the present day. If I had to recommend any book to get a good, in-depth understanding of the X's and O's of U.S. imperialism and empire, then this would be at the top of the list. This book will definitely radicalize you. The goal of the U.S. empire is to safeguard the global class system, keeping the world's land, labor, resources, and markets accessible to transnational investors. While protecting and securing capital and markets abroad is a main priority for empire, especially as upholding the overall global system of capital accumulation and deterring alternative modes of development, such as keeping countries de-industrialized and subservient to the needs of foreign capital. Thank you for watching. This was another report and review for the Library of the Geopolitical Insurgent. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.